Stonehand. The battle had gone poorly. A day earlier, the assembled Imperial fleet, bolstered by 4 vessels from the NihtWyrtha Planetary Defense Force, had entered the system with high hopes. An Ulgarith man-of-war was bombarding the planet of Cragford Hold, and large troop carriers hung in low orbit, dropping what seemed like an endless line of dropships to the surface. The mighty Navis Imperialis battleships Bellum Despectus and Aurore Persecutor engaged the Ulgarith without hesitation, destroying the man-of-war and the troop carriers. It had not been easy. Lance batteries failed to do any damage. Torpedoes detonated in clouds of seed pods. It came down to a macro-cannon gunnery duel, which the Imperial battleships won, but with heavy damage. Only the NAW Siaxfloga participated alongside them. The other 3 Navis Astra Wigathane ships had been placed on the fleet's flank to prevent enemy escape and took no part in the battle. After deploying ground forces, the fleet maintained station, monitoring the groundside conflict, with the battleships delivering occasional orbital bombardments. There was a sense that the NihtWyrthan ships were little more than auxiliaries. Then came a message via Vox Fleetcom from an astropath aboard a freighter in the Rust chain, a string of red stars on the northernmost edge of the Arcana Inclusium. A large Ulgarith fleet was attacking the Forge World's outposts. The fleet translated immediately to engage, taking the Siaxfloga with them. This left the NihtWyrthan force, consisting of the cruiser Leotbrek, the frigate Elfsinu, and the destroyer Welsiax, to guard the hold alone. The trio patrolled the void above the planet, monitoring signals from the surface while their astropaths scanned the immaterium for threats. It was a tense and stressful few hours, where every crew member waited, lost in thought. Barely 9 hours later, the Welsiax's astropath began to panic as 2 colossal Ulgarith men-of-war emerged from the void. The small NihtWyrthan fleet was ordered to engage, with the fleet's commodore leading the action. The Leotbrek attempted to position itself for a broadside against the vast, tree-like Xenos vessel, a grave mistake. The Ulgarith ship unleashed a barrage of shard-like projectiles, peppering all 3 NihtWyrthan vessels. 1 enemy ship rammed. Elongated limbs pierced the Leotbrek's hull, shattering the cruiser in 2 as it attempted to maneuver away. The engine section burned, lighting the void, while the forward section was torn open, venting crew and systems. There was no hope for them, but to trust in life pods and wait. At the dawn of his career, Sigebeald stood on the bridge of his ship, watching the Leotbrek burn. He did not yet resemble the grim figure he would one day become, nor the honorific he would later carry, one that he laughed at in private and grimaced at in public. His crisp tunic felt scratchy and stiff. He caught his reflection in the viewport. Lieutenant Commander, how fast things changed in this new world of NihtWyrtha. He gripped the hilt of his chainsword, Tempest's Bite, forged from NihtWyrthan skyfall iron and gifted to him by Queen Hildilith after the Battle of Geofon Station. A gesture of gratitude he never felt worthy of. He had begun his short career in the Navis Wigathane, a flotilla of ironclads patrolling NihtWyrtha's storm-lashed oceans. Steam-belching behemoths, riveted in the Weezier dry docks, had replaced the wooden boats of the old Hlaffords when the Imperium first made planetfall. Sigebeald trained at the Wyzire Academia, one of the first cadets to pass. He had been eager to leave his world behind, hungry for stars. Yet, as fate, or perhaps the Emperor's ironic will, would have it, he never left. The Battle of Geofon had changed everything. He had gained, almost by accident, a reputation as a calculating commander capable of pulling off victories with limited resources. Just one victory, but it stuck. It was there, amidst blistering fire and panicked tech thralls, that he had made a gesture, an open hand, raised to signal restraint to a weapon seer. The battle was won, barely, but the name remained, Sigebeald the Stonehand. Despite his doubts, the post-war month saw his field commission confirmed. He went from station commander to formal command, and now he found himself at the helm of a proper void ship, the Navis Astra Wigathane Welsiax, a destroyer, lightly armored, not even particularly fast. Within months, the Ulgarith War began, and so the fresh-faced midshipmen from the oceans now bore responsibility for 9,000 souls, aboard a vessel forged in the depths of Forge World in Caloris, blessed in burning oils, marked with the sigils of both Omnissiah and Emperor. The Welsiak's armament was 6 forward torpedo tubes, ancient relics requiring manual realignment after every 5th salvo. Its broadside carried light macro cannons, good for strafing frigates and melting armor. A single dorsal turret housed quad medium-caliber guns, a respectable tool only if your enemy had the decency to fly in a straight line. Sigebeald stood beside the command throne, his new domain. He did not sit. He hadn't earned it, not yet. The crew were strangers, Mechanicus-trained voidsmen, Imperial conscripts transferred to help train the techno-barbarians of his homeworld, half-machine officers who spoke in binaric and viewed him with quiet skepticism. They weren't the crew of Geofon Brick. They weren't his crew. Not yet. Fear was seated, perhaps too comfortably, in the helmsman's seat. He didn't mind her manner. He hadn't sat in it himself. Something about it still felt not his. She glanced at him, brushing a lock of jet-black hair from her pale face. "Your course, Lord?" she asked. Her dyed hair was unusual. All Wirthans had straw or red hair, depending on their region. Her choice was eccentric, but her piloting spoke for itself. He felt the slight tug of gravity as the man-of-war maneuvered. His new navigation officer, Fear, had the helm, adjusting grav plating to mitigate the gravity wave and align the ship as if turning to face a tide. A feisty pilot who until recently had operated heavy shuttles. She seemed competent. Out in the void, the monstrous Ulgarith vessel turned to face the remaining frigate and destroyer, maneuvering to separate the two. Captain Sigebeald watched as the Elfsinu launched a brace of torpedoes and veered toward the moon, clearly hoping to use it for cover. His cheek twitched. Between his destroyer and the frigate, they were outgunned and outclassed. It had taken 2 full Imperial battleships to destroy a single Ulgarith behemoth, and those had failed with lance batteries. His own ship lacked the firepower for a real duel. His crew lacked the seasoning for hit-and-run support tactics. He tapped the hilt of his chainsword, the rhythm matching the memory of waves against NihtWyrtha's coasts. He needed a strategy, and time was not on his side. The tactical auspex shimmered with threat glyphs. The Ulgarith vessels loomed ahead, ugly, mismatched silhouettes. They looked like trees, literal trees with vast branches reaching out from their prow into the void. Along their hull, they had macro cannon ports that belched projectiles, some solid rock, some enormous seed pods of sharpened darts and acid sacs. They also had plasma macro cannon, firing bioplasma wrapped in magnetic envelopes like Imperial ships, but these seemed to have a mind of their own, tracking targets as they flew. Their baffles were huge bundles of roots that shot out at random angles. Their engines screamed unholy frequencies, as if the ships themselves howled, propelled by some form of plasma drives that glowed a sickly green. They had pods or growths along their bark hulls that exploded shards of spores that acted like shields. More confusing to Sigebeald were the thruster banks, funnels that fired jets of gas to move the huge hulks. It made no sense to him how they could have enough pressure to move the vast craft, especially considering how well they maneuvered for ships so large, doing it in a rolling motion. The command deck was silent, save the low hum of cogitators and the whispers of servo-psalms from the bridge tech priests. Sigebeald's gloved fingers drummed on the hilt of his sword. The Welsiaks moved through the stars like a small fish hunted by predators in a dark sea. The void ahead rippled, some form of energy shielding? Or was it a gas cloud vented from the Xenos vessel? At the Vox console, Officer Garspec adjusted dials and frequency wheels, his hands trembling slightly. "Fleet channel clear, Captain," he muttered. "No distortion, but—" A sickly chorus slithered through the Vox lines, a language not spoken but groan, a groaning, whispering noise like creaking wood in dry leaves, like something vast shifting in the dark. Garspec shuddered. "Ulgarith transmissions, sir. I can't translate yet, but I'm working on it." Sigebeald nodded, eyes locked on the Xenos ships. They were like nothing made by human hands, massive, gnarled trees adrift in space, and only 2 Navis Astra Wigathane warships remained. The Ulgarith ship turned from the wreck of the Leotbrek, its ram spines pulling free. The Leotbrek's macro cannon had been useless. Sigebeald squared his shoulders, gripping the hilt of Tempest's bite. He remembered Magos Tiberius grinning too widely during the ship's handover. "If you scratch the paint, I'm billing your estate." He hadn't thought he was joking. Now, as the target lumen blinked red on the auspex, Sigebeald gave his first true order as captain. Bring us to attack posture, plot torpedo solution, clear macro cannon for firing. He paused, let the silence settle. Then, measured and certain, let's see if we can't give these Xenos a headache at least. Thalassophobia. The bridge hummed with tension as the Walsiak shadowed the Ulgarith ship. Garspek sat rigid at his console, immersed in the alien transmissions, a discordant symphony of clicks, creaks, and biological resonance. He had always possessed an uncanny ear for patterns. His bloodshot eyes scanned the oscillating waveforms. The shifting tones seemed to correlate with the Xenos' movements. The deck thudded beneath him, the distant clanking of torpedo reload arms, the hiss of struggling servos. Moisture clung to every surface, as the adepts hadn't yet brought the life support systems to full function. Garspek wiped the sweat from his brow. The green glow from the enemy ship's weapon ports shimmered through the viewport, reflecting on damp deck plates like the gaslioma lights under NihtWyrtha's black oceans. Above, the red lumens blinked like the aphenlioma, dancing through stormy night skies. His breath caught. Memories flashed back to him, unbidden. Years ago, aboard his first commission, the ironclad Hālgengas has struck an orc sea mine. The hull had ruptured. Water surged in too fast for the repair crews to manage. The ship began to sink. The Vox adept, his mentor, had fled, scrambling for the lifeboats. Garspek had been left alone in the Vox cabin. He had sat there for a long moment, then deliberately and with shaking hand had taken the seat of the adept, taking the scroll of the ship's last location report, and pressed the cogitator link and began to transmit. He'd repeated the distress signal endlessly, adjusted the dials with numb fingers as cold bit through his bones. This is the Hālgengas sinking. Latitude 334 north, longitude 104.26 east. Men off in boats, we are down by the head. Emperor saved the queen. The sea came into the ship, first a trickle that rose as the ship tilted downwards. The room had filled with water. He remained sending the message. Outside, the captain had ordered the abandoned ship. He ignored him, sending the signal. When waist deep, the lumen died. So with a blind servitor rotating the charging handle, he kept sending. When water reached the set and it flickered out in a shower of sparks, he had sat there in the dark, waiting for the ship to crumple around him. The servitor still uselessly turning the handle with a blank expression. The groaning metal, the cold, the darkness, it consumed him. When the ship began to list hard to port, he stood, straightened his uniform, donned his cap, and saluted the servitor, then waded through the rising black sea into darkness. He floated alone. The sound of the ship breaking apart under the waves rumbled through his body as he gasped for air in the cold water. He was alone, just him and the corpses who bobbed around him, life jackets blinking in the dark, lighting their ghoulish faces as they stared open-eyed back at him, moving with a rolling motion as if still alive. He waited for death. It never came. The gaslioma glowed beneath the water. The aphenlioma lit the sky. Nithelm shone above like a ghostly sentinel. It was beautiful, peaceful even. Just him and a sea of corpses with flashing red lumen, blinking out one by one as their batteries died. The dropship searchlight lit him up just as he began to slip away. Divers pulled him up, barely conscious. Later he was awarded a medal for heroism. Half the crew had survived thanks to him. But Garspek knew the truth. He had remained not out of courage, but because the water had terrified him more than death. Given a choice of commission, he had chosen the void because he couldn't face the sea again. The flashing red lumen above his console reminded him of that night. He looked back down, sweat beading on his forehead. The alien creaks and clicks echoed again in his ears through his headset. His hands shook. He gripped the railing, pressed his forehead to the cool metal. A single tear ran down his cheek. Then, resolve, he wiped it away, straightened. I cannot decipher their language, he said aloud. But then he paused. The pattern repeated again. A cluster of creaks and clicks, every time they shifted bearing. The final part of the pattern always changed. Garspek's eyes narrowed. He charted the sequences, matched them to spatial coordinates. It hit him, positional data, course adjustments encoded in sound, like sonar. He ran the patterns through all 7 Vox cogitators, mapped the frequency shifts to the navigator's charts, every time correct. The Xenos were communicating vector changes, but not just direction. Weight, mass, height. He stared in disbelief. They were redistributing internal water to control their ship's mass profile. He turned to his captain, clutching his notes like a lifeline. "Captain Sigebeald, Lord." Sigebeald snapped to him. "Mr. Garsbeck? The ships move internal mass, likely water, to maneuver. They're shifting it to control balance and velocity." Sigebeald snatched the datasheet. It made sense. He turned, his voice calm but sharp. "Fear, bring us into engagement vector." She grinned, augmetic ocular adjusting. "Readying to pass for a broadside, Lord." "No," Sigebeald said. He held up his hand, Stonehand again. He looked at the viewport. He mapped the different ships in his head, running speeds and vectors. "Order Elfsinu to continue toward the moon," Sigebeald added. "Make the Xenos think she's running." Garsbeck hesitated. "Captain Rodsprock is a gazetted captain, sir." Sigebeald knew he did not have the rank. The crew were looking at him, some smirked, others confused. Fear tapped her hand on the helm control, glancing between Garsbeck and Sigebeald, as if placing a wager on who would back down. Sigebeald knew he was correct. He was sure of it. The frigate Elfsinu appeared to be running anyway. He took a breath. "Has Captain Rodsprock sent command orders?" he asked. Garsbeck shook his head slowly. "No, Lord." Sigebeald turned, his expression hard. "Then there are no orders to countermand. I gave an order. I'm sure I can find another Vox officer easily enough." He said it with a confidence he did not feel. It was a gamble. He could theoretically be removed from command by any of the senior officers for breaking chain of command. Garsbeck looked down. "Yes, Lord." He sent the signal. Outside, the Elfsinu turned for the moon. The Ulgarith vessel followed. Sigebeald's smile widened. The second Ulgarith warship was beginning to maneuver to support. "Ram them," he ordered. Fear blinked, then grinned. "Aye, Captain, bringing us into the worm's throat." The Welsiax rolled smoothly, thrusters flaring hard as it cut a deadly arc across the void. Sigebeald nodded to the hangar deck officer. "Launch fighters and bombers. Have them target the pursuing vessel. Blind it." The officer obeyed, though the rest of the crew watched warily. The Welsiax's brute force engines surged. The destroyer's smaller size lent it speed. Behind it, Ulgarith shardfire hissed out in pursuit, but the splinters fizzled out before they could reach the stern. Ahead, the tree-like ship loomed, its midsection exposed, weapon ports now visible. Sigebeald grabbed the back of the command throne, mag-locking his boots. The crew followed suit. Fur stared intently at the viewport. Garsbeck covered his head, whispering prayers. "Drop gravity field," Sigebeald called out. "All power to forward voids. Fegward." The destroyer surged forward. The void shields sparked as they met the Ulgarith spore field, a sickening miasma of organic particles and warp-tinged biomass. For a heartbeat, the shield held, then shattered with a howl. But the Welix was already cutting through, dispersing the cloud into shrieking strands of matter. Then came the impact. The destroyer's prow slammed into the Ulgarith hull. There was no resistance. The bark-like plating of the Xenos ship split like rotten wood, the prow driving through in a shattering explosion of biomass and bark. The Welsiax plunged through the enemy vessel, shearing internal decks apart. It tore through flooded passageways, boiling oceans of nutrient sap, igniting chain reactions in the pressurized cavities. For a moment, the destroyer passed through an internal sea, then plunged back into the outer hull of the opposite side of the ship from inside. The Ulgarith warship writhed. Its hull buckled. The destroyer burst free from the rear, venting steam and shrapnel. The Xenos vessel shuddered violently. Some of its forward spines and gnarled branches sheared off under the force of the impact. Its inner ocean burst into the void, freezing instantly and forming luminous arcs of crystalline fluid in the destroyer's wake. Figures floated among them, Ulgarith crew preserved in death, their bodies suspended like drowned insects in amber. Behind, the second Ulgarith man-of-war surged forward, blinded by the swarming Imperial strike craft. It did not see the fate of its sibling until it was too late. It struck the shattered hulk amidships, barely half a mile from the ragged breach carved by the Welsiax. The pressure wave from the collision squeezed the Xenos vessel's internal sea outward. Vast torrents of fluid and noxious gas erupted from the wounded hull, venting in spectacular geysers into space. The already weakened structure ruptured catastrophically. Organic plating split. Methane thrusters tore open. The first man-of-war broke in two. Its engine section, torn free by the impact, swung wildly into the flank of the second vessel, slamming into its sibling's side with terrible force. Superheated reactor plasma spewed across the second ship's hull, igniting fires that swept hungrily through its decks. Then the reactors gave way, unable to hold together in their sagging organic cradles. Plasma fire bloomed silently. The two Ulgarith vessels were engulfed in raw energy, consumed in a blinding detonation, like a newborn star burning fierce and fast, their dying screams swallowed by the cold, eternal dark. The Welsieks rolled in the aftershock. Lumens flickered. The ship's gravity reasserted with a jolt. Sigebeald remained upright, one hand on the command throne. Sigebeald steadied himself against the flickering lumens and spoke, voice clipped but calm. Damage report. The reply came from Engineer Primus Hālgeras, crackling with binaric undertone. Multiple hull breaches along the forward compartments, sections C Alpha through E Delta vented, bow armor stress fractured, prow plating buckled inward by 6.3 meters. A second voice followed, Deck Officer Marin from Damage Control. Weaponseer Nadrin spoke. Torpedo bay integrity compromised, 2 tubes offline. Internal guidance servos misaligned, likely warped from the impact. We've got coolant leaks along the dorsal line, sir. Venting plasma through Deck 3. Fires contained. Then Fur, still at the helm, added dryly, gravity grids flickering in the galley. Crew are floating with their dinner trays. Sigebeald smiled at the last report. His eyes remained fixed on the drifting wreck outside. Contain the fires. Focus repairs on propulsion and torpedo alignment. We'll need both before long. The bridge buzzed with status readouts. Fur brushed her hair back, her usual smirk gone, replaced by measured composure. Sigebeald turned to Garspec. The Vox officer stared, stunned, then blinked, slowly turning to his console. The blast shields lifted. Wreckage drifted outside, glowing. The Elf Sinu emerged from the moon's shadow, intact, its void shields still glowing from emergency cycling. 2 battleships for 1 cruiser, Sigebeald murmured. Acceptable for the Imperium, but for the Navis Astra Wigathine, that's a quarter of our grand fleet, he said dryly. Fair adjusted the ship's flight to a less complex course using the nearby moon's gravity. She spoke, not looking up. In tonnage of ships, that amounts to half our fleet, she added. He turned to Garspec. Stand by to pick up life pods from the layout break. Yes, Captain, Garspec replied, sending the signal. Captain, he had called him. So, Sigebeald thought. I have Garspec's confidence now at least. Then fear froze. Her face went pale. Captain, she whispered, I have translation points forming. Sigebeald's gaze returned to the void. Lightning tore across real space. Jagged tears in the fabric of reality. 1, 3, 7. Ulgarith man-of-war emerged from the warp, their engines glowing in green light as they powered towards the planet and its 2 defenders. Sigebeald's expression didn't change. Set course to intercept, he said. Some crew hesitated, others moved without question. Garspec called out, Captain Rudspruck is calling, his hand over the Vox. More translation points forming, Fear snapped. Her hands flew across navigation controls, rerouting trajectories. Sigebeald stood calm, watching the black sea of space. Then, another light. The fabric of space tore again. From the void emerged the battleships Nitsidu and Ridleyoma. Their guns cycled power, already locked on targets. Cruisers Watersrath and Stormsrath followed, shields flashing as they moved into line. Frigates and destroyers poured in behind them, forming a spearhead. Strike craft launched in glittering waves. The Navis Imperialis had arrived. Garspec ignored Rudspruck's call. He listened. The Xenos transmissions shifted, no longer aggressive, coordinated, nervous. He turned to Sigebeald. Their flagship is ordering a withdrawal, sir. Sigebeald exhaled. The Ulgarith ships turned slow at first, then accelerating. Roots flared blue as they vanished into warp space. Thank you, Mr. Garspec, Sigebeald said. Outside, the battlefield was quiet once more.